Stock up on these tips to stay ahead of all the talent. We got the Stone Brains to help you persist. Rebellion team showing them all how to stay valiant. Always 3 steps ahead. Untap, upkeep, resist.
It only harmonizes if it wins prizes. Comment below as we walk through the 4th week of Dragonstorm Standard. Alrighty folks, we are through the second of 3 major regional championships during Dragonstorm, and we have got a lot of data to parse through, Max. So let's get started. This week we went through 22 major tournaments, counting MTGO challenges, LCQs, RC-Qs, and of course, heavily weighing RC Minneapolis itself. Once you get through all that data, folks, what you're going to see is that Izzet Cutter came out in force this weekend, boasting 59 top 8s and 10 trophies total. For those keeping score at home, that works out to 34% of all top 8s this last weekend and 46% of all trophies this last weekend. That's dominance at a level we haven't seen in a hot minute. So while half of competitive players are screaming for bans already, ranging from Cutter to Stock Up to Rage, we're not going to see that before RC Hartford, just letting you guys know that. So make sure you get a ton of reps in. We're going to cover the nuance between the builds in a few minutes. Max, take away the next part.
Oh yeah, and Jeskai Dragons may only have 12 top 8s and 2 trophies, but one of those trophies is a regional championship, Minneapolis, so we give some deference to the Shiko faithful this week. For as clunky as this deck felt at times during our testing, it sure beats up on Izzet Cutter continuously.
Dimir Tempo returns to the fray in 3rd place with 15 top 8s and 2 trophies despite its struggle to contain Cutter. The deck nonetheless beats up on many of the decks positioned to beat Cutter, making it kind of a second level meta hedge, which I can respect, though given the prevalence of Cutter, I'm not relying on it personally.
Mono-Red aggro rounds out tier 1 with 13 top 8s and 2 trophies. This deck may catch some splash hate from the Cutter, but also is a half turn faster on average than its Izzet counterpart, while having 3 drops unaffected by lockdown and links off board to hate on all the greedy mana bases playing those lockdowns.
Kicking off Tier 2 is Omni Combo with 11 top 8s and a single trophy. This deck transformed over the past week with a transition sideboard plan that allows it to turn from a combo deck into kind of a Tier 2 Azorius control list that everybody has overboarded against the combo into. So it's clever, Max, but it's also kind of a one-trick pony that may be lacking as everyone has 2 weeks to sort out a balanced boarding plan against it this time.
Orzhov Pixies came in 6th with 10 top 8s and a single trophy. Look folks, if you think you're playing 80% Cutter matchups all day, then this is your Huckleberry. If you think you're playing against decks that aren't aggro, this is a trap. Welcome to matchup lottery hell. Plan accordingly.
Xur's Domain managed 9 top 8s and a single trophy of its own this past week. As the 3rd lockdown deck to make the tier list, you can see the other 2 are likely better positioned into the meta right now, but that doesn't mean it'll hold true by Hartford. Get some reps in, see how this feels. There's still some innovating to be done with Domain.
It sure is. Rounding out our tier list is Oculus. 14 top 8s and a single trophy. Oculus is the new Jund of Standard now. You're 55-45 against the field, but those coin flips eventually get you across 9 rounds. If you can't find a way to build this to hedge harder, you're going to have a solid 5-4 record and unfortunately miss day 2.
Yep, and over in Brewer's Corner, I will take a look at some LCQ winners with Abzan Pixies and Golgari Roots.
And I'll be highlighting LCQ winner Gruul Dragons in a spicy new Caretaker's Control build. But first, let's talk about the villain of the format, Izzet Cutter.
Clement Chu took down the 155-player MTG STA Championship in Malaysia with Izzet Cutter, cementing a momentous week for the archetype as it showed dominance across the world metagame. Now, let's take a look at this build. You're first and foremost going to note that there are 2 Drake Hatchers just hiding out in the main and 1 sitting over here in the side, and there's only 2 Slickshot show-offs. This is a hedge for the mirror. It's also a hedge for other red-based aggro. It's saying we expect to play a lot of mirror matches when it's 30 to 40% of the metagame. And they're right, it does a lot of work. Let's also note that they're on the 5th island instead of that first Thundering Falls. I'm just going to go ahead and say it, folks. You're playing an aggro deck. Please quit putting Surveil lands in when you just need to get going. I don't know why everyone likes the Thundering Falls, but I'm going to say, just for the record, it's wrong. Don't play it. The cards you are playing, Stock Up, Monstrous Rage, Storm Chaser's Talent, Quarry Steel Cutter. These are all the broken cards in Standard that everybody wants to ban. This deck, though, I want you to start thinking of it like Delver and stop thinking of it as if it's a new archetype, okay? This plays the same rules that Delver did 10 plus years ago, and that's what we're trying to deal with here.
Okay. Good point about the Delver. Is there really a mirror breaker for this deck since so many people are playing it?
So yes and no. I mean, you've got Drake Hatchers. Those are huge. You can go into the Screaming Nemesis route if you really want to. But outside of that, there's not too much you can do without giving up massive points in other matchups. So at a certain point, you're just going to sit there and go, all right, we're going to hedge with maybe up to 4 Drake Hatchers in the main and lose Slick Shots. But all of a sudden, your domain matchup gets worse, your control matchup gets worse. You don't have the ability to just plot Slick Shots and, one-shot them at the end of the game. Now you're trying to grind with Drake Hatchers through a field of removal, and you're relying on seeing those Quarry Steel Cutters, and you're relying on those coming alive. So it's just a matter of where do you want to make your hedges, right, Max? Like, do you want to hedge for the mirror, or do you need to hedge for the rest of the meta? Because one's going to preclude the other at a certain point.
Is anything going to cut through the Izzet Cutter C? Jeskai Dragons certainly wants to try. So let's talk about Jeskai Dragons.
Casey Miller took down the 1,365-player regional championship in Minneapolis this past weekend with Jeskai Dragons, ending the Oculus dream and preventing Izzet Cutter from clinching the biggest trophy. Let's take a look at why. Now, Max, first and foremost, you got 4 lockdowns, you got a split up, you got a Day of Judgment. That is 6 Wrath effects in the main, and 5 of them are at 3 mana. That should tell you how quickly this format is moving. We need to be doing stuff early, we need to be interacting early, we can't wait for Wrath of God effects anymore. We need to be hitting everything, including the Cutter, on turn 3. Now, we also have 4 Beza, 4 Shiko, and 2 Meringue as the threat base. That's 6 Dragons, which plays well into the card advantage engine that we're doing with Roiling Dragonstorm, as well as, of course, the stock-ups. So this is a really balanced build. You've got 10 threats, 6 pieces of card advantage if you're not counting the Shikos, which you should. You've also got 6 Wraths, and again, Shiko flashes back lockdown, let's not forget that. So even if they blow it up, it can come back. There's also 4 counterspells main and 5 flash threats post-board for grindy disruption, so think of this as pre-hedged for aggro, post-hedged for combo, control, and mid-range.
Certainly seems like a well-balanced list. I have to ask, you mentioned temporary lockdown. You know how fast this format is now. You have to have those 3 mana removals and board wipes. Does this deck have a reasonable plan for the other temporary lockdown decks?
Somewhat. I'll put it this way. I don't love the fact that this going into Domain without a Jace is kind of like you're taking a bad version of Azorius Control against Domain without a Jace, and we remember what that was like last season. It wasn't fun. You don't have a mill plan. They're just going to grind you out with Beanstalks, right? So against Domain, I don't love where this is positioned. Against Omni Combo, you need a fair amount of graveyard disruption if you want to take that one down, because they're getting Game 1, right? Game 1 is their combo plan. You have 4 counterspells. That's it. Most of your removal's dead, most of your interaction doesn't matter. So if they're going to take Game 1 off of you with Omni, you better be taking the post-board games. And I think it's capable of doing that, but it's not going to be an easy trip.
That tracks. That definitely tracks. Man, I don't miss, going up against Domain without Jace. That was bad. But let's talk about another deck that's trying to get a week ahead of all the hate that's coming for Cutter, Dimir Tempo.
RJU made it to the finals of MTG SEA's 155-player championship in Malaysia before losing to Izzet Cutter in the finals. Now, a lot of people look at Dimir and they go, was it a fluke? It doesn't have a good Cutter matchup. I think that's something that's been made abundantly clear throughout testing. It's a struggle. It is. But they're trying to shore it up, right? They've got the 4 Bats, 3 Preachers, 2 Quarcy, a Shelly, and a Gix's Command in the main. That's a lot of anti-aggro that's getting pushed into the main, and we're finally seeing Quarcy emerge now that the Nowhere to Run decks are limited to mostly Orzhov Pixie, and like Esper Pixie has fallen off the planet. So I can see where this can actually make a comeback, right? We're not as worried about Esper Pixie going through us anymore. We can get those Curiosities and those Kaidos down and start pushing through all the lockdown decks. So this is probably one of the most balanced main board decks, and it has just slight hedges post board, but like main board, half the deck is hitting removal and trying to hit aggro, the other half is trying to grind card advantage and just push tempo and snowball against anything that's a little bit more slow, right?
Quarcy's definitely got a spot here in the meta, but can this deck reliably push through Izzet Cutter, or is it just preying on the decks that are trying to do that?
I think it's going to prey on everybody except for Cutter. I think Cutter is going to be a tough matchup, much in the way that Dimir really struggled with Mono-Red, and Cutter only made that worse in my opinion, because Mono-Red, at least you could try to go 1-for-1 on removal early, and if you curved removal into a Curiosity, you could run away with a game. Whereas in this scenario, they get Cutter down, that's just an endless stream of creatures coming at your removal. And now you're playing this back and forth tempo game, and they all have haste. So it's a little rough when you're going aggro v aggro because you have to. That's the mode you're both in, because you don't have inevitability. They have Cutter, they have inevitability, and now they're just going to push right through you with haste. That's why I don't love it into Cutter.
Yeah, man, sad day for Dimir when it can't beat the most popular deck in the format right now. We'll see how the preceding weeks go. But let's talk about the other big deck, the red-based deck, Mono-Red Aggro.
Chase Fleeman took down the LCQ, the 8th one, in Minneapolis with Mono-Red Aggro, pushing this archetype back into the limelight by handling Cutter in the finals. And why would you play this over Cutter? Let's dive in. So first and foremost, I'm just going to say, for a slight OCD perspective, this is the smoothest curve in the game, and it makes me so happy to just see straight 4-ofs all the way until we get to the final slot with Frenzy. It's wonderful. This also has a better plan than I've seen from a lot of red decks. It's playing 3 of a card known as Magebane Lizard. If you haven't read this card, don't be scared. Take a look. Read it right now. What this says is it's going to ping Cutter hard for trying to activate, right? They're playing a lot of non-creature spells, and this is just going to start hitting them for that. So it does a nice job of playing offense while sitting back on defense, which is something that you traditionally struggle with. Let's also note that Lithomantic in the board is a great answer to Draycatcher if that's your concern, and it should be, because they should be playing that to try to even this one out. So those are all options. Regardless, I really like the balance of the attack here. That's not something I've seen a lot of in Standard. It's been a lot of hard hedges lately, and this is a much more balanced take on aggro.
And I recall week after week in testing, the question kept getting asked, is it time for Magebane Lizard? And I think it is. I think it finally is. But my question, should we be playing full Sunspine Links inside of this board?
Personally, Max, I'm playing 4. And my reason for that's simple. Let's look at the top decks. You've got Jeskai Dragons, 3-color mana base. You've got Jeskai Oculus, 3-color mana base. You've got Xur's Domain, 5-color mana base, right? Like, you have a lot of decks that are getting hella greedy right now with their mana base, and having Sunspine Links against those decks, especially the fact that Dragons and Domain are going to be lockdown decks. So Sunspine Links just sidesteps that entirely. And that's what you want post-board. If they want to go all in to deal with the mouse plan on 1 and 2, you want to go on Nemesis, Tursa, Sunspine Links, and make it a scenario where they have to answer you 1-for-1 Wrath to creature, right? You get that ratio going, you're going to run them over every time.
Okay. Yeah, we still like Sunspine Links in the sideboard here. I think it's still very friendly to the format. All right, that does it for Tier 1. Let's go down to Tier 2, where I will start things off with Omni Combo. Gregory Johnson made it to the semifinals of RC Minneapolis with Omni Combo. Wow. Before falling to Oculus, so let's discuss what we have going on here. This is a newer build, folks. This is not what you're used to seeing with the full invasion of Arcavios, all of that. Pre-board, we have the newest build of this deck featuring Meringue and Founding of the Third Path as the Milcon win with Omni. Post-board, we sort of have an Azorius control build, if you want to call it that. It's a transition plan to shift over if we think the disruption coming in will just be way too effective. So good game 2 plan here. And I just want to note, Clarion Conqueror shutting off one of the most formidable cards against this deck in Ghost Vacuum. So this new build, Morong River region, I think has just been surging in popularity. I think it slots in really well here. And I also think that Abuela's Awakening is enough to make Omni Combo go off. I don't know necessarily that we need to go the way that we used to, but, I think honestly, Omniscience plus the Abuela's Awakening, that can sometimes be enough game 1. Transition into a different game plan game 2. I think that'll work.
So my question here, Max, I look at this and I think all they have to do game 2 in most scenarios is stone burn out Meringue River region, and now I'm stuck with like a couple Bazes, a couple Overlord of the Mistmoors, and praying that one of those closes this out. So do we want another alt win to get pushed in at this point?
Yeah, I know I just said, we got away from Invasion of Arcavius, but I think, slotting in one copy of it along with a Jeskai Revelation, we just discovered that card is perfect for this deck as the win con here. I think that's a solid strategy, especially when you consider that Snowbrain is going to get used. As I always like to say, stay ahead of your opponent. maybe you think you came up with a new game plan this week. Well, there are going to be people anticipating that. And so for those opponents, even if they're a minority or a fraction of the base, I think you still want to plan ahead for that, plan ahead for Stonebrand in this case, and just stay a step ahead. I do like just those 2 cards slotted in.
That's fair. That's fair. Talking about staying 2 steps ahead of the meta, let's talk a little bit about Orzhov Pixies.
So Orzhov Pixies has its strength in the current meta, and let's talk about it. Yasutaka Nagao won the 262-player Champions Cup in Japan this past weekend, annihilating Izzet Cutter in the finals. Wow, so all eyes on Orzhov Pixie. Let's talk about how this hardest hedge deck in Standard is doing currently. This is just designed to beat Izzet Cutter, and I think if that's still the norm in the next couple of weeks, I think this may be the deck that everyone eyes to take the finals. This deck just attacks the board state effectively with lockdown loops. It wins the resource war. That's one of the reasons I really like this deck. Run them out of resources, shut down their board state. You've also got Lauren, Beza, Flanker, Shelly. All of these cards have different matchups where they shine. This is honestly the most balanced iteration of the deck I've seen in a while. And surprise, surprise, it's not demons, but we do have Unholy Annex here to serve as your card advantage engine. So look out for this build. It's very well balanced, very well tuned, and it has some really nice chinks in the armor for all the other meta decks.
So, Max, I look at this and yep, it beats Cutter. I can confirm that. I beat the crap out of Cutter with this in some LCQs over the weekend, but can it survive the matchup lottery when you play not Cutter?
Oh boy, yeah. I mean, I just glorified this deck, but I think it's really become a jack of all trades. It tries to win every matchup, and as you and I both know in experience, you can't really do that. There's not really been a standard recently to memory where there's one deck that just cuts across everything. No pun intended. But as you know, in the matchups, in all the matchups that we talked about with Cutter, some of the other aggro base, it does really well. It wins the resource war, it grinds out the board state, and then it goes over the top. However, in one matchup in specifically Domain, it can falter pretty greatly. I know Lauren was added to the list to kind of counteract some of the enchantments, some of the other Cutter, decks that you see out there. It's often been called unwieldy and slow in our testing, but I still think with repeat castings, I think Lauren can help you kind of diminish or mitigate some of Domain's advantage. Some of Golgari Ramp also, those Beanstalk decks that rely on enchantments. But nonetheless, it seems like the Domain matchup is the one to look out for here.
Fair. And I mean, Lauren can feel clunky, but there are times when it's just an absolute beatdown, right? Like, we've all played Lauren into a FOMO or a Profts or a Leyline Binding or an Overlord and just been like, yes, this is where I want to be right now. But speaking of Overlords, let's get to the Overlord deck, Xur's Domain.
Gothmuse took down Friday's 64-player MTGO challenge, beating Izzet Cutter, and we're just going to note, whenever anything beats Izzet Cutter this week, all eyes on it. But it beat Izzet Cutter in the finals of Domain. Let's talk through this design. We do have 3 temp lockdowns. We've gone the way of temp lockdown. You just need the fast board wipes. That's just a hard truth right now. Despite the fact that you're running Beanstalk, it doesn't benefit you any. I think the temp lockdowns are a must. 5 Wrath effects total, noting that 3 of those are temp lockdown. 6 early removal spells between Ride's End and Smite. We've got Smite back in the deck. For a while we rejected this card. It didn't really, go over the top enough for the prowess or, the deck's using Valiant. But I think Smite is necessary here. You got to have it in the early game to respond to those red-based aggros. Pre-board hedged for Cutter and red aggro. That's just the plain truth about this deck. It really needs to beat those right away. Post-board, it does push into interaction to handle the control, ramp, mid-range packages that you will inevitably see in your tournaments. This pattern is just the pattern that a lot of decks need to follow right now. It's nothing special, but Xur's Domain pulls it off really well with the way that these cards slot in. So I like where Xur's Domain is positioned currently.
So, I mean, Domain, we know it's a strong choice, but I look at that deck and then I look at Omni Combo and I think, can we win? Or are we just going to get rolled?
Yeah, that's the one matchup, right? While it does well against Cutter and Pixie, it tends to falter when it comes to a more reliable, a more consistent Omni Combo build, which is what we're seeing right now. As put on display by the Omni Combo list we just put on, it's pretty well balanced. Counter spells just tend to slot in awkwardly. Graveyard Hate tends to slot in awkwardly. So be ready to adjust your sideboards accordingly, depending on your local metas, especially if you go the route of Zero Domain at tournament. I'd look particularly at Heritage Reclamation as one possible answer, one possible way to go in your sideboards here.
Fair. And speaking of decks that don't love seeing Heritage Reclamation, let's talk about Jeskai Oculus.
Out of all the meta decks this week, this one was my favorite for 2 weeks running. So it was sad to see it not take it all, and just do kind of like above 50%, but not win the big thing. So Jeskai Oculus, Michael DiBenedetto Plummer made it to the finals of RC Minneapolis before falling to Jeskai Dragons. Sadly, this was the Jeskai Oculus build they used. Let's take a look at how this deck is positioned. Look, there are roughly 6+ slots in the main of Oculus. These are the slots. Adakar Waste, one of those went to a Restless Anchorage. We've got 2 Spyglass Sirens in the deck as well here. I think there's a big question around Spyglass Siren, so they kind of went halfway here with 2. 1-1 Abrade Dragon Hunt Split. Also a big question whether you want Abrade, how many copies of Dragon Hunt you want. 2-1 Tursa and Wear Knight Story Split. We definitely want Tursa. I think the second copy is totally legit. Winter Knight has been a big question, so we see how they went 2-1 here. You got the first in the Flood Maw over the 4th Torch. And the sideboard, we do see the second copy of Winter Knight. We do see 2 Filigree Silexes for the cutters and the red-based aggros. A single Ral for the grind. I think that's the spice. And 3 counter spells to diversify against different decks. Omni Combo is still out there.
So, Max, I think there are 2 big questions right now that are floating for everyone to answer. And the first one is, do you want Spyglass Sirens still in this deck? And the second one is, do we still need that second A Darker Wastes, or can we just go down to 21 lands? Where are you at on those?
So I have an easier answer for the latter. I think I've pretty much settled this, that I think we could go 21. It's just this deck rummages really well through the library. It's going to find that third land drop, the turn 3 land drop. That's the critical one. I think it's going to find it more often than not, just with the combination of cards we have here. Now, as for Spyglass Siren, it is worth some consideration because as the interaction between Torch the Tower, you need to go 3 toughness. There are so many X3s in the format that are healthy right now, especially with the ability to exile. That's very critical against some decks. Spyglass Siren's map token can help you do that, so I do like Spyglass Siren for that reason, but also because it adds an invasive attack when you go into Prof turn 2. So having that flyer that gets stronger and beefier just in case you don't find your Oculus, I think that's pretty helpful in the aggro matchup. So I don't know, I do like Siren, although I'm kind of iffy on it. I think I do like it.
Sometimes it just comes down to those minor margin points, and Siren is a hell of a role player with a deck that wants to be able to discard creatures with flying, wants to be able to discard creatures in general, needs Torch the Tower fodder. Like, there's just so many roles that card is playing that I can see where it's a difficult cut for just about everybody right now. But that said, we're going to move it right along. We're going to talk about Brewer's Corner. And before I even get to the first one, just shout out to Rix. I know you're in the MTG Rebellion Discord. I know you posted this list. We talked about it a couple weeks ago. We weren't sure what it was going to do. You took down an LCQ with it, buddy. Props. Max, let's get into it. Gruul Dragons.
Yeah, huge shout out to Rix. Anytime you win an LCQ with a deck, especially a brew, like we're going to give you credit. You definitely deserve the props this week. Look, this build is a bit careful about sticking the landing as it becomes more aware of low curve opponents. I like this build because it responds to the meta. Frankly, sometimes we get brews that are pretty wild, Timmy type brews that don't really respond to what's out there. They just want to do their own thing. And this deck is not that at all. It wants to apply pressure with the ramp advantage. So we've got Burst Lightnings, we've got Abrades. I know people have been questioning, do we need a Braid or not? I think you need a Braid. I really think you do with the Cutter decks out there. It needs to respond to red-based aggro early and defeat the Cutter decks. I think Burst Lightning and Braid help you do that. Sarkhan is also going to help you ramp just a little bit, and it also puts a body on the board. I think a body on the board is critical, even if it gets killed, even if you're doing the chump blocking. I think you need that turn 2. We've got World Wagons. I like World Wagons. I've said it before. I like that it can be crewed to keep the pressure on as you wait the arrival of your dragons in the mid game. We've also got mainboard Scrap Shooters, a 4/4 reach body with ability to shut down Cutter, shut down enchantments, and domain and ramp. I think that's critical as well. Look, the focus here is kept on the 5 mana 5 mana value slot for all the aggression. You got Magmatic Hellkites there, drawing your fire on turn 4. So I think with this build, you have a higher likelihood of your turn 5 dragons staying on the board, sticking, and really showing their strength.
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, it's a cool list. There's still a lot of room for tuning. I don't think you should count it out going into the RC for Hartford either, because Scrap Shooter is a hell of a card against Cutter. This deck has a weird positioning. I think we really need to put a little bit more time into tuning it, because it's fascinating what it was able to do to Cutter decks all weekend long. But speaking of decks that took down LCQs, let's talk about Abzan Pixies. Shout out to Drew Kobus, LCQ number 11, winner with Abzan Pixies, and also shout out to Fire Shoes for showing me their list. They were also on this over the weekend, and it was a lot of fun. Not gonna lie, blew like $100 building it really quickly on site because I just had to know if it was a thing. And it's spicy. It's a spicy number. If you don't like Orzhov Pixies because you feel like it's missing just a little something, Skirmish Rhino and Severance Priest, along with Yathan Roadwatcher, these are reasons to go into green. These are very good reasons to go into green. And let's not forget that Obstinate Baloth is also in green for that mirror match against all the other Pixies. So this is kind of a weird deck in the sense that it plays almost a mini Reanimator strategy within the bounce strategy. You've got the Surgical Suites here, and you're going with Yathan Roadwatcher. So it's got like 6 reanimation spells, 8 bounce spells, and then all the stuff that gets value when you bounce it, like the Rhinos, the Priest, the Lawbringer, Sentinel, Lorne, Nowhere to Run, Momentum Breaker. You see what I'm talking about? Like, there's just so many targets here. You are target rich for just 2-for-1 value. So it's playing a lot like Jund of the old days, which, I mean, I'm a paper boomer at this point, according to all the Zoomers I've talked to, so I love me some Jund.
Yeah, and I love the flavor of, shout out for the flavor of Son of Siege Rhino, finally putting that card into a deck that can be formidable. So that's awesome.
Right on. And with that, let's go to the third one, Boros Control Max.
All right, credit to AlexCG11235, another LCQ top 8er. Look, let's talk about why this deck works. It's Boros Control. What can you expect from Boros Control? It's not a very exciting archetype a lot of times, but I want to point out High Noon plus Voice of Victory, that can lock down your opponent. It can really take away their ability to interact and respond to you. High Noon in particular shuts down the Discovery decks that have become popular lately. Just one card to shut it down completely. And then we've got 3 copies of Day of Judgment, 2 copies of Split Up, 5 board wipes. You just need the turn 3 board wipes. Split Up serves that purpose here. We've got 3 copies of Elspeth plus 4 copies of Caretaker's Talent for overwhelming board state advantage and draw card advantage. Having those 2 cards out on the board is just devastating. And then I want to note a card that came out, Tarkir Dragonstorm, Dalkovan Encampment. You can win your stalled board states here. After post board wipe, your opponent has no cards in hand, they're top decking. This thing can win the game for you. This deck also notably runs Forge, but also Authority of the Consuls in the sideboard. Those cards hate each other, but why not both?
Why not both, indeed? Why not both, indeed? I love where they're going with this. We've been waiting to see a decent Elspeth deck. A Caretaker's build is perfect for it. This one goes into red and says, High Noon main deck, let's go. Let's get Cutter right now. And I love where that's positioned. For a lot of people who like, oh, High Noon, it's kind of great against Cutter and bad against other stuff. It's pretty good against Omni Combo. It's pretty good against Jeskai Dragons. You get to shut down Chico. I've seen a lot of scenarios where you get High Noon out against control decks like Dragons, and then you just wait till they're at 10 life, dome them with a High Noon on their end step, and then untap and dome them with the next one. And that's just 2 lava axes they can't deal with. So it's worth noting that the card has some broader applications than you immediately see when you look at it. But speaking of decks that have broader applications than you immediately see, let's get into Golgari Roots. Shout out to Jabber James, LCQ number 14's winner. Love this deck. For everybody who's like, I don't know, temporary lockdown, it beats Roots. Note that there are 4 Haywire Mites in the main board of this. So if you want to hedge for both lockdown and Cutter, this card does quite a number. And honestly, there was a piece I didn't realize till I was sitting there talking to some different people. And Haywire Mite is the best blocker in Standard right now. I don't know if anybody else has realized this, but you block a creature and they go to Monstrous Rage it, you just sack it to kill the Monstrous Rage roll token, and now there's no trample. There's no trample. So you've efficiently blocked Monstrous Rage and gained 2 life. So it might be the best blocker in Standard right now, and it might be the most versatile 1-drop in Standard right now, being able to blow up both Cutter and Lockdown. So I love where they went with this. This is really in tune with where the meta is going into Minneapolis. Probably still will be going into Hartford if everybody's still going on this Cutter kick. So I love where this is, Max. This is such a cool list. Shout out again to Jabber James. You crushed it, buddy.
Yeah, shout out to you, and discovering the Haywire Might is still in the format and still a very effective card. I love that.
You gotta love it when the spice comes back, right? We've got a long season. These cards are running in for, 3 years of rotation at a time. So I love it when you find a little gem that was forgotten a year ago, and you're like, but wait. So anyway, that's going to bring us to our final segment, Ahead of the Curve. Now, Max, we looked at 12 archetypes in our recap, but this time, rather than talk about what we're playing this week as our team is prepping for Hartford, we're going to give you a list of questions that you, the viewer, should be asking, and you should be attempting to answer while you're testing currently, because you can be damn sure our team is.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I'll start. Let's do these questions. Look, the first thing you need to think about: does my deck beat Izzet Cutter reliably pre and post board? That's going to be very critical, as we saw just a high population of Izzet Cutter lists. The deck, I don't want to say it's easy to pilot, but it's certainly become, very pilot friendly. You don't need a ton of knowledge on how to pilot. It does have some key decision points, but people are out and about testing with this deck and just, unashamedly playing it. So be aware of it, be able to beat it pre and post board. Secondly, in tuning my deck to beat Izzet Cutter, where do I lose points against the rest of the field? So think about that critically. You don't want to over prepare, you don't want to overboard, so be careful about how many slots you devote to it. Thirdly, if there are 3 or more options to beat Izzet Cutter, which of these is best positioned against the other options to beat Izzet Cutter? Because just as, where you see prey, there's going to be predators. So be wary of the fact that you're going to see, for example, Dimir Tempo. You're going to see other decks that go after Izzet Cutter. Be able to beat those as well.
Absolutely. Fourth, what splash hate does my deck get from other decks hating Izzet Cutter? And I want you to think of this in terms of Mono-Red to start, but widely apply it to the archetype that you're in love with for Hartford as well. For instance, Mono-Red has some issues with all the lockdown decks, right? Your mice package just got a lot harder to push through. Other decks have other issues because of Izzet Cutter existing. Make sure you know what the splash hate is that you're going to be getting. Fifth, does my deck have a plan for Omni Combo in Game 2? And am I sideboarding correctly given their transition board? I'll give you a quick example. Oculus, we thought, post-board against Omni Combo, we pull all the torches, we pull all the Glacial Dragon Hunts, we pull all the removal, and then we'll be fine. We'll just put in a bunch of counter spells, we'll put in Ghost Vacuums, and then Omni Combo went ahead and said, all right, then we're going to play Voice of Victory and Clarion Conqueror. And I said, oh shit, and lost. So the solution there was actually to keep in the Glacial Dragon Hunts to kill their 2 and 3 drops that we could continue to push tempo, right? That's what I mean when I say you got to know how to deal with their transition board. It's not a combo deck game 2 every time. That's a bit of the poker game you're going to be playing. Last but not least for questions, which hate cards are diversified enough to help multiple matchups without diluting the power level of the effect that I need? And again, I'm going to give you a quick example. Destroy Evil, Exercise, and Lauren all have some similar effects, but each one is better and worse in different matchups. Against Demons, for instance, Mono Black Demons, a deck that we saw pop up a few times over the weekend, I want Destroy Evils and Exercises. Couldn't care less about Lauren. But like Oculus Mirrors, Lauren's pretty good for me. So that's where we're going when we talk about that question.
Absolutely. And hey, that's another week in the books, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Look, the Rebellion team is out and about conquering. Good luck to the Rebellion competitive team this week at Hartford. We did see improved play. We saw persistence. We saw determination from our players at RC Minneapolis, and I want to give you guys props for that. I expect the same from the team headed to Hartford. Represent our movement well, you guys. We await your tales of victory.
A quick shout out. I had a lot of people, Max, come up to me while I was over in Minneapolis, and they were so thankful that we were doing the show. They were so kind. They were so nice. I met a lot of you. You guys are great. Thank you. Thank you for coming up. Thank you for saying something. I'm really glad I got to meet all of you. And, I know everyone watching, you want to find the hot tech that helps them take down RC Hartford. So I'll simply say this. I wouldn't play Cutter personally. I'd play the deck that beats Cutter while simultaneously having the strongest Game 1 matchup against the other Tier 1 decks. And as to what that is, Well, that's confidential team testing on our end, so make sure you join the Discord and get in line with the team. But otherwise, I think you can answer that question. You got this. Please like, share, comment on this video to show some support for our community, and we appreciate having all of you here. Until next time, folks, untap, upkeep, resist.